Hey there! Tonight, we're setting sail on one of the greatest journeys ever told. Not a pleasant cruise across calm waters, but a 10-year odyssey of survival, cunning, and an almost desperate longing for home. You'll follow Odysseus, the man of many turns, the sacker of cities, as he tries to cross the wide, dark sea from the ruins of Troy back to the rocky shores of Ithaca. I thought it appropriate, with the release of the new trailer for the movie, that we should tell this story. Along the way, you'll meet monsters with single eyes, goddesses who turn men into swine, and creatures whose songs promise death wrapped in beauty. If this kind of storytelling helps you rest, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it actually brings you peace. And let me know in the comments if you are excited for the new movie. So dim the lights, let the Mediterranean breeze blow, let the waves rock you gently, and let's begin. The story doesn't really begin with Odysseus setting sail. It begins much earlier, in the smoking ruins of Troy, where the Greeks have just won a war that lasted 10 brutal years. 10 years of blood and sand, of watching friends die, of living in tents and eating dust, all for a woman named Helen, whose face, they said, launched 1,000 ships. Odysseus himself was one of the architects of victory. It was his idea, that wooden horse, the Trojan horse, standing tall and hollow outside the gates of Troy, a gift from the Greeks who had supposedly given up and sailed away. The Trojans, despite warnings, despite prophecies, dragged that horse through their gates. And when night fell and the city slept, Odysseus and his men climbed out from inside the horse's belly and opened the gates from within. Troy burned. The screams echoed across the Aegean, and when morning came, the city that had stood for generations was nothing but ash and memory. But victory came with a price. The gods, those fickle immortals who watched from Mount Olympus, were not pleased with how the Greeks had conducted themselves. They had desecrated temples, shown arrogance, spilled blood on sacred ground. And so, as the Greek ships prepared to sail home, the gods began to plot their revenge. Some heroes would never make it home. Some would arrive only to be murdered in their own halls. And Odysseus, clever Odysseus, would face perhaps the longest punishment of all. Not death, but delay. Not oblivion, but an endless, exhausting journey across seas that seemed to multiply the farther he sailed. When we meet Odysseus in Homer's epic, it's been 20 years since he left home, 10 years fighting at Troy, and now, as the story opens, another 10 years trying to get back. His wife Penelope waits in Ithaca, fending off suitors who have moved into the palace like parasites, eating his food, drinking his wine, sleeping in his halls, each one trying to convince her that Odysseus is dead and she should remarry. His son Telemachus has grown from infant to young man, without ever knowing his father. And Odysseus himself is trapped on a distant island, held captive by a goddess who loves him but cannot make him love her back. This is where Homer chooses to begin. Not at the start of the journey, but in the middle, with Odysseus as far from home as it's possible to be, with his wife under siege, his son powerless, and his name fading into legend. It's a deliberate choice, this structure. We'll learn about his adventures not in chronological order, but as Odysseus himself recounts them later, sitting in a foreign court, trying to explain how one man could suffer so much and still keeps sailing toward home. Odysseus is trapped on the island of Ogygia, and his captor is the nymph Calypso. She's beautiful, immortal, and desperately in love with him. She saved him from drowning after his ship was destroyed, pulled him from the waves, nursed him back to health, and then refused to let him leave. For 7 years, she has kept him there, offering him everything. Immortality if he stays with her, eternal youth, a life of ease on an island paradise where the trees bear fruit year-round and the caves smell of cedar and juniper. But Odysseus doesn't want paradise. He wants home. He sits on the beach every day, staring at the horizon, his eyes wet with tears, his heart heavy with longing. He's polite to Calypso. He shares her bed, because what choice does he have? But his mind is always elsewhere, always in Ithaca, always with Penelope, the wife he left behind 2 decades ago, always wondering if his son even remembers him, if his father is still alive, if his house still stands. Calypso doesn't understand. She's a goddess. Time means nothing to her. She doesn't age, doesn't decay. To her, 7 years is a blink. She sees Odysseus's grief as temporary, something that will fade if she's patient enough. She tells him he's foolish to prefer a mortal woman over her, a mere human wife who will grow old and wrinkled, while Calypso remains forever young and perfect. But Odysseus, for all his flaws, understands something Calypso does not. That mortality gives meaning to love, that the finite nature of human life makes every moment, every choice, every reunion precious in a way immortality can never be. On Mount Olympus, the gods are watching. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, has always favored Odysseus. She admired his cleverness at Troy, the way he thought 3 moves ahead, the way he could talk his way out of situations other men would have to fight through. And she's tired of watching him waste away on Ogygia, so she petitions Zeus, king of the gods, to intervene. It's not easy. Poseidon, god of the sea, is furious with Odysseus. The hero blinded Poseidon's son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, and the sea god has been tormenting Odysseus ever since, stirring up storms, smashing his ships, ensuring that every voyage becomes a disaster. But on this day, Poseidon is away, visiting his worshippers in Ethiopia, far from Olympus. And in his absence, Athena makes her case. Odysseus has suffered enough. His men are all dead. His ships are destroyed. He's been held captive for 7 years. Isn't it time to let him go home? Zeus, moved by Athena's plea, or perhaps just tired of the whole affair, agrees. He sends Hermes, the messenger god, down to Ogygia with orders for Calypso. Let Odysseus go. Now, Hermes arrives on the island in a flash of divine light, his golden sandals carrying him across the waves as if they were solid ground. He finds Calypso in her cave, beautiful and radiant, weaving at her loom and singing in a voice that would make birds fall silent just to listen. He delivers Zeus's message with the practiced efficiency of someone who has delivered many such messages and knows better than to sugarcoat them. Odysseus must be released. That's not a request. That's an order from the king of the gods. Calypso is furious, not at Hermes. He's just the messenger, but at the gods in general, and Zeus in particular. She launches into a bitter speech about the double standard of the gods. When male gods take mortal lovers, she says, no one objects. Zeus himself has had countless affairs with human women, but when a goddess loves a mortal man, suddenly it's a problem. Suddenly the gods intervene and demand she give him up. It's unfair, it's hypocritical, and and she knows there's nothing she can do about it. Still, she obeys. Because you don't refuse Zeus, not if you want to keep existing. She goes to find Odysseus, and there he is, as always, sitting on the beach, staring at the sea, his eyes red from crying. She tells him, with barely concealed bitterness, that he's free to go. She'll help him build a raft, give him supplies, send him off with favorable winds. But she can't resist one last attempt to change his mind. She reminds him what she's offering: immortality, eternal youth, a goddess who will never age, never change, never die. And she asks him, point blank, if he really thinks his mortal wife, no matter how faithful, can compete with that. Odysseus's response is careful. He's not stupid. Calypso could still change her mind, could still find some way to keep him here. So he's diplomatic. He tells her yes, Penelope is mortal. Yes, she's older now, probably showing her age after 20 years. He knows she can't match a goddess in beauty or power. But none of that matters. She's his wife. She's the mother of his son. She's home. And he would rather be mortal and home than immortal and trapped, no matter how beautiful the prison. It's a telling moment. Odysseus, famous for his eloquence, for his ability to talk his way out of anything, speaks here with simple honesty. He's not trying to charm Calypso or manipulate her. He's just telling her the truth. And maybe in that truth, there's a kind of tragedy for her, because she realizes, perhaps for the first time, that you can't make someone love you, no matter how perfect you are, no matter how much you offer. Love isn't a transaction. It's not rational. And Odysseus's heart left Ogygia long before his body does. Building the raft Calypso, true to her word, helps Odysseus build a raft. Not a flimsy thing of driftwood and hope, but a proper seagoing vessel. She gives him tools, a bronze axe, an adze, and shows him where to find the best trees. Tall pines and alders, trees with straight trunks and good timber. Odysseus, who has been idle for 7 years except for crying on beaches, throws himself into the work with an energy born of desperation. He cuts down 20 trees, trims them, smooths them, joins them together with wooden pegs and braided rope. He builds a deck, a mast, a rudder. He weaves a sail from cloth Calypso provides. It takes him 4 days. 4 days of hard labor, sweat dripping onto the wood, his hands developing new calluses, his muscles remembering old skills from his days as a ship captain. When the raft is finished, Calypso loads it with supplies: bread, water, wine, clothing, everything he'll need for the voyage. And then, on the 5th day, she bathes him, dresses him in clean clothes, and sends him off. The wind is favorable. The sea is calm. Odysseus pushes off from Ogygia's shore and sets his sail, aiming for home, using the stars to navigate. Calypso watches from the shore, a lonely figure growing smaller and smaller until she's just a speck on the horizon. And then, nothing. For 17 days, Odysseus sails alone. 17 days of open ocean, nothing but sky and water in every direction. He navigates by the stars, keeping certain constellations always on his left, the way Calypso instructed him. He ratios his food and water carefully. He talks to himself to stay sane. And for 17 days, nothing goes wrong. The wind holds steady. The raft, surprisingly sturdy for something built in 4 days, holds together. He begins to think, dangerous thought, that maybe he'll actually make it. Maybe the gods have finally decided to leave him alone. He should have known better. Poseidon's wrath Poseidon, returning from Ethiopia, happens to glance down at the sea, his domain, his kingdom. and he spots something that makes his divine blood boil. A raft. A small, pathetic little raft, carrying a man who looks suspiciously like Odysseus. That Odysseus, the one who blinded Polyphemus, the one who called out his own name in a moment of arrogant pride, ensuring that Poseidon knew exactly who to punish. And here he is, almost home, sailing freely across Poseidon's ocean as if nothing is wrong. The sea god's face darkens, literally. Clouds gather. The wind shifts. Poseidon raises his trident, that three-pronged spear that can shake the foundations of the earth and brings it down hard. The sea responds instantly. Waves rise, not the gentle swells of a calm ocean, but mountains of water, walls of foam and fury. The wind, so favorable moments ago, now comes from all directions at once, howling like something alive and furious. Odysseus's raft, that sturdy vessel he built with his own hands, begins to disintegrate. The mast snaps, the sail tears, the deckboards start pulling apart. Odysseus clings to the wreckage, terrified. He thinks, in a moment of dark honesty, that maybe he should have stayed with Calypso. At least on Ogygia he was alive, even if he was miserable. At least drowning wasn't imminent. He remembers his comrades who died at Troy, who fell in battle with glory and honor, who had funerals and mourning and songs sung about their bravery. And here he is, about to die alone, in the middle of the ocean, his body food for fish, his name forgotten. There's no glory in this kind of death, no honor, just water and darkness and the cold. But then something unexpected happens. A sea nymph named Leucothea, who was once a mortal woman herself, takes pity on him. She rises from the waves in the form of a seabird and lands on what's left of the raft. She tells Odysseus to abandon the raft entirely. It's doomed. Instead, she gives him her veil, a magical thing woven from sea foam and divine thread. He should tie it around his chest, she says, and swim. The veil will keep him afloat, keep him from drowning. When he reaches land, he should return the veil by throwing it back into the sea. Odysseus, ever suspicious, hesitates. Is this a trick? Another god playing games with him? But what choice does he have? The raft is coming apart beneath him. He's going to drown anyway if he does nothing. So he takes the veil, ties it around his chest, and as the raft finally breaks apart completely, he dives into the churning water and starts to swim. It's exhausting. The waves are enormous, each one trying to drive him under, each one a battle for air and life. His limbs grow heavy. His breath comes in ragged gasps. He swallows seawater, chokes, spits, keeps swimming. For 2 days and 2 nights, he fights the ocean, and the ocean fights back. Poseidon's storm rages around him, but the veil, true to Leucothea's word, keeps him afloat. Barely. Just barely. Finally, on the 3rd day, through eyes stinging with salt, Odysseus sees land. An island, rocky and forested, rising from the sea like salvation itself. But it's not that simple. Of course it's not. The shoreline is jagged with rocks and cliffs, the surf pounding against them with enough force to shatter bones. If Odysseus tries to swim straight to shore, the waves will smash him against those rocks and leave him a broken, bleeding mess. He swims parallel to the coast, looking for a better spot, his strength fading with every stroke, until finally he sees it, the mouth of a river flowing into the sea. He prays to the river god, a quick, desperate plea, asking for safe passage. And either the god hears him or his luck finally turns, because the current calms. He swims into the river mouth and drags himself onto the shore, collapsing onto the mud and grass like a shipwrecked sailor in every poem ever written. He's made it. He's alive. But he's also naked, exhausted, and completely alone in a strange land with no idea where he is or how far from home he still might be. He remembers Leucothea's instructions and unties the veil, throwing it back into the water. It sinks immediately, carried away by the current, back to whatever divine realm it came from. Then Odysseus crawls inland, away from the shore, and finds a dense thicket of bushes and trees. He burrows into the leaves and undergrowth like an animal seeking shelter, covers himself with branches, and falls into a deep, dreamless sleep. The sleep of someone who has been awake for 3 days, fighting for their life. The sleep of someone who has nothing left. The Phaeacians. When Odysseus wakes, he has no idea where he is. The sun is up, filtered through the leaves of the trees he's buried himself under. His body aches. His skin is crusted with dried salt and mud. He's still naked, which is going to be a problem. He listens, carefully trying to figure out if this island is inhabited, and if so, by what? Monsters? Cannibals? Gods? At this point in his journey, any of those are possible. What he hears, unexpectedly, is laughter. Female voices, young and carefree, speaking a language he understands. They're not far away. He crawls out of his hiding spot, moving carefully, and peers through the bushes. He sees a group of young women playing near the river, tossing a ball back and forth, their clothes laid out on the rocks to dry. They've been doing laundry, and now they're taking a break, enjoying the sunshine and each other's company. Odysseus faces a dilemma. He needs help. He needs clothes, food, directions. But he's a naked, filthy, shipwrecked stranger with salt-crusted hair and wild eyes. If he just walks out of the bushes, these women are going to scream and run. So he does what Odysseus does best. He thinks. He waits. He picks up a leafy branch to cover himself and steps out slowly, trying to look as unthreatening as a shipwrecked naked man can look. The women see him, and as predicted, most of them scream and scatter. But one stays, the leader of the group, a young woman with calm eyes and a steady voice. Her name is Nausicaa, and she's the daughter of King Alcinous of the Phaeacians. She doesn't run because she recognizes something in Odysseus's posture, in the way he holds himself despite his condition. This is not a madman or a monster. This is someone in need. Odysseus speaks to her with all the eloquence he can muster. He praises her beauty, compares her to Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, which is flattery, but not untrue. He tells her he's been shipwrecked, that he's lost everything, that he's at her mercy. He doesn't beg, because begging suggests weakness, and Odysseus never quite manages to make himself seem weak even when he's at his most vulnerable. But he's respectful, humble, in a calculated way. And Nausicaa responds to it. She orders her servants, who have cautiously returned, to bring him clothes and food. They wash him in the river, give him clean garments, oil for his hair. Athena, still watching, enhances his appearance subtly, making him seem taller, more imposing, more regal. When the Phaeacian women see him cleaned up, they barely recognize him as the same bedraggled stranger who stumbled out of the bushes. Nausicaa gives him instructions. He should follow them at a distance as they return to the city. When they reach the palace, he should go straight to the queen, Arete, and clasp her knees in supplication. If the queen favors him, the king will help him. It's good advice. Among the Phaeacians, As in many ancient cultures, the queen holds significant influence. Win her over, and you've won everything. The Palace of Alcinous. The Palace of King Alcinous is magnificent. Bronze walls gleaming in the sunlight, golden doors, silver doorposts, gardens full of fruit trees that bear year-round, pears and pomegranates and figs always in season, fountains flowing with clear water. It's wealthy beyond anything Odysseus has seen since Troy, maybe wealthier. The Phaeacians are a blessed people, favored by the gods, living in peaceful prosperity at the edge of the known world. Odysseus enters the hall, still invisible thanks to a mist Athena has wrapped around him to keep him from being challenged by guards or servants. He walks straight through the feasting nobles until he reaches Queen Arete, and there he drops to his knees, clasping them in the traditional gesture of supplication. The mist vanishes. Suddenly, everyone can see him, this strange man kneeling before their queen, and the hall falls silent. Odysseus makes his plea. He doesn't yet tell them who he is. He just asks for help. He's been shipwrecked, lost at sea, and he needs passage home. That's all. The Phaeacians are famous for their ships, for their skill as sailors. If anyone can get him home, they can. There's a tense moment where anything could happen. A young noble named Euryalus suggests they should be suspicious of this stranger. Who is he? Where does he come from? But King Alcinous, a good and generous ruler, silences the objection. The stranger has sought their protection. That means he's under their hospitality, and hospitality is sacred. They'll help him. But first, let him eat. Let him rest. Tomorrow they'll talk about ships and journeys. They feast that night, a great banquet in Odysseus's honor. A blind bard named Demodocus sings for them, his fingers dancing over the strings of his lyre as he tells stories of the Trojan War. He sings about the wooden horse, about how the Greeks hid inside it and emerged to burn Troy to the ground. He sings about Odysseus, the architect of that plan, and his cleverness. Odysseus, sitting there listening to a song about himself, begins to cry. Quietly at first, trying to hide it, but the emotions are too strong. He's hearing about his own life as if it's already legend, as if he's already dead. He's hearing his glory sung about while he sits here, anonymous and broken. So far from home, he might as well be dead. King Alcinous notices. He stops the song gently and asks the stranger why he weeps. What is his connection to these stories? And finally, Odysseus reveals himself. "I am Odysseus," he says, "son of Laertes, king of Ithaca, the man in your song." And then, because they've asked, and because hospitality demands honesty in return, he tells them his story. Everything that's happened since he left Troy. All the horrors, all the losses, all the desperate struggles to get home. He talks through the night, and the Phaeacians listen in rapt silence, because Odysseus is not just any storyteller. He lived these events. He lost his friends to them, and when he speaks of them, the pain is real, the longing is real, and the words carry weight that no bard's song ever could. He starts at the beginning, after Troy fell, when 12 ships full of men set sail for home, all of them eager to see their families, none of them knowing what the gods had planned. Odysseus begins his tale to the Phaeacians with brutal honesty. Their first stop after leaving Troy was the city of Immerse, home to the Cicones. It wasn't exploration, it wasn't accidental, it was a raid. The Greeks, still flush with victory from Troy, still in the mindset of warriors and conquerors, attacked Immerse, sacked the city, killed the men, enslaved the women, and divided the plunder. It was business as usual for a returning army in the ancient world. Terrible, yes, but not unusual. Odysseus, showing the kind of leadership that would have saved his men many times over if they'd listened, ordered everyone back to the ships immediately. Take the plunder and leave, now, while they still could. But his men, drunk on victory and literally drunk on the Ciconi's wine, refused. They wanted to celebrate. They wanted to feast on the beach, roast the sheep and cattle they'd stolen, drink until they couldn't stand. Odysseus warned them. He knew the Cicones wouldn't stay defeated. He knew they'd send for help. But his men, confident and stupid with success, ignored him. The next morning, the Cicones returned with reinforcements from inland. A full army, angry and ready for revenge. The Greeks, many of them still drunk, stumbled into a battle they weren't prepared for. The fighting was desperate and bloody. 6 men from each ship were killed, 72 men total, cut down on that beach, while the survivors scrambled to get to the ships and push off from shore. Odysseus managed to get them away, but barely. And now, for the first time since leaving Troy, they sailed on with empty benches, with spaces where friends had sat, with the knowledge that this journey home was not going to be easy. Zeus, still angry at the Greeks for their behavior at Troy, sent a storm. For 9 days, the ships were battered by winds that came from all directions, making navigation impossible. The sails were shredded. The men, already demoralized from the defeat at Immerse, now clung to their oars and prayed to gods who didn't seem to be listening. On the 10th day, the winds finally died, and they found themselves approaching an island, a small, pleasant-looking place with green hills and calm waters. They had no idea where they were. They'd been blown completely off course, far from any familiar sea routes. But they needed rest, needed food, needed to repair their ships. So they anchored and went ashore. The Lotus Eaters. The island seemed peaceful enough. No signs of fortifications, no smoke from cooking fires, just grass and trees, and a general sense of tranquility that should have been the first warning that something was wrong. Odysseus, being cautious, didn't take all his men ashore. He sent a scouting party of 3 men to explore, to find out if the island was inhabited and if the locals were friendly. They walked inland, following a narrow path through flowering meadows until they came upon the inhabitants, the Lotus Eaters, a strange, peaceful people who seemed to exist in a perpetual state of contentment. They welcomed the scouts warmly, offered them hospitality, gave them food. Specifically, they gave them lotus, a plant that grew wild on the island, sweet and intoxicating. The scouts ate it, and something happened. Not death, not violence, something stranger. They forgot. They forgot who they were. They forgot where they came from. They forgot about home, about their families, about Ithaca and the ships waiting on the shore. All they wanted was more lotus, just one more taste of that sweet forgetfulness. Why leave? Why go anywhere? Why remember pain when you can just stay here and be content? When the scouts didn't return, Odysseus went looking for them. He found them sitting among the Lotus Eaters, smiling vacantly, chewing on lotus flowers, their eyes glazed with a happiness that looked disturbingly empty. He called to them, but they didn't respond. Or rather, they responded by offering him lotus, telling him to stay, to forget his troubles, to just be happy. It would have been tempting, After everything he'd been through, after the war and the storm and the deaths at Immerse, just sitting down and forgetting would have been so easy. But Odysseus understood what the lotus really was. It wasn't peace, it was oblivion. It was giving up. And he hadn't come this far to give up now. He grabbed his men, physically dragged them back to the ships as they cried and fought and begged to stay. He tied them to the benches, and even as they sobbed and pleaded, he ordered the fleet to push off and leave the island behind. Some of his men looked back longingly as the island receded into the distance, and Odysseus had to post guards to make sure none of them jumped overboard to swim back. It was a harsh lesson about temptation and escape. The Lotus Eaters weren't evil. They weren't trying to hurt anyone. They were offering a kind of paradise, a life free from struggle and pain and memory. But it was a paradise without meaning, without purpose, without the possibility of ever getting home. And Odysseus, for all his flaws, understood that some things are worth struggling for, that forgetting who you are is a kind of death, even if your body keeps breathing. The island of the Cyclopes. The next island they came to looked more promising. Fertile land, wild goats everywhere, abundant resources. It was uninhabited, as far as they could tell, just across a narrow strait from another larger island where they could see smoke rising from cooking fires. Odysseus decided to investigate. He took his own ship, leaving the other 11 safely anchored, and sailed across the strait to the larger island. They found a cave near the shore, enormous, with a fence outside that held pens full of sheep and goats. Inside the cave were stores of cheese, bowls of milk, everything neat and organized, as if someone lived there, someone big, judging by the size of everything. Odysseus's men, practical and nervous, suggested they should just take some cheese and leave, rob the cave and get back to the ships before whoever lived here returned. It was good advice. Odysseus should have listened. But he was curious. He wanted to see who lived here, wanted to know what kind of creature kept such a well-stocked cave. Maybe they'd be friendly. Maybe they'd offer gifts, the way proper hosts should. So they waited. They lit a fire, made themselves comfortable, ate some of the cheese, and settled in to meet their host. They didn't have to wait long. As evening fell, they heard him coming. Heavy footsteps that shook the ground, a massive shadow blocking the cave entrance. And then he entered, and Odysseus and his men saw what they were dealing with. A cyclops, a giant, easily 3 times the height of a man, with one enormous eye in the middle of his forehead, muscles like boulders, and a club that could crush a ship. His name was Polyphemus, and he was a son of Poseidon, which should have been another warning sign if Odysseus had been paying attention to the theme of his life. Polyphemus drove his flocks into the cave and then rolled an enormous boulder across the entrance, a stone so massive that, as Odysseus would quickly realize, 22 men working together couldn't budge it. They were trapped. The Cyclops lit his own fire, much bigger than theirs, and in the firelight he finally noticed them, these small figures huddled at the back of his cave like mice in a pantry. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice like rocks grinding together. And Odysseus, trying to salvage the situation, tried the speech about hospitality. "They're travelers," he explained, "shipwrecked Greeks returning from Troy. They're suppliants, asking for protection and aid, as is the custom among civilized people. Surely Polyphemus has heard of Zeus, who protects guests and strangers. Surely he respects the ancient laws of hospitality. Polyphemus laughed, a horrible sound that echoed in the cave. Cyclopes, he said, don't care about gods. They don't care about Zeus or his laws. They're strong enough to do as they please. And then, to demonstrate this philosophy, he reached out, grabbed two of Odysseus's men, and smashed them against the cave floor, like someone swatting flies. Their skulls shattered, their brains splattered across the stone, and while Odysseus and the surviving men watched in horror, Polyphemus ate them, raw, bones and all. He crunched through them like someone eating crabs, tearing flesh from bone, his single eye half closed with satisfaction. Then he washed down his meal with buckets of milk, lay down among his sheep, and went to sleep, his belly full of Odysseus's friends. Nobody, the remaining men, were paralyzed with terror. Odysseus's first instinct was to draw his sword and kill the Cyclops right there while he slept. He could see the spot just below the ribs where the liver would be. One good thrust might do it. But then he realized the problem. The boulder. Even if he killed Polyphemus, they'd still be trapped in the cave. That stone was too heavy for them to move. They'd die there, slowly, entombed with the rotting corpse of a giant. So Odysseus did what he always did when violence wasn't the answer. He thought. All night, while Polyphemus snored and his men wept quietly in the dark, Odysseus planned. Morning came. Polyphemus woke, stretched, and grabbed two more men for breakfast. The same horrifying scene. The screams cut short, the crunching, the blood. Then the Cyclops rolled the boulder aside, drove his flocks out to pasture, and rolled the boulder back, sealing the survivors inside. He left them there, in the dark, with the broken bodies of their friends and the knowledge that they were nothing but food to this creature. But Odysseus had a plan. In the cave, among the Cyclops' belongings, was a massive olive wood staff as tall as a ship's mast. Polyphemus used it as a walking stick. Odysseus and his men, working together, cut a section from it, about 6 feet long. They sharpened one end into a point, then hardened that point in the fire until it was like iron. Then they hid it under the sheep dung that littered the cave floor and waited. When Polyphemus returned that evening, Odysseus was ready with the second part of his plan. He approached the Cyclops with a bowl of wine, dark, strong wine from Immerse that they'd brought with them. He offered it as a gift, a gesture of goodwill. Polyphemus, who'd never tasted wine, drank it down and immediately wanted more. He drank bowl after bowl, the wine as strong and undiluted as it was, and Odysseus kept pouring, kept watching as the giant's eye grew unfocused, as his movements became clumsy. "What's your name?" the Cyclops asked, his voice thick with wine. "I want to know, so I can give you a gift. Eat you last as a reward for this wonderful drink." And Odysseus, thinking, quickly gave his answer. "My name is Nobody. My friends call me Nobody. That's what you should call me." Polyphemus laughed, delighted with this simple joke. "Nobody," he said. "All right, Nobody. I'll eat you last. That's my gift to you." And then the wine finally took hold, and the giant collapsed in a stupor, vomit pouring from his mouth, chunks of human flesh mixed with wine spilling onto the cave floor. Odysseus and his men grabbed the olive wood stake and put its point into the fire until it glowed red hot, smoking and terrible. Then together they lifted it, carried it to the sleeping Cyclops, and with all their strength they drove it into his eye. They twisted it like a drill, the hot wood searing through the eye, the heat and the force combining to blind him utterly. The eyeball burst and sizzled. Blood and fluid poured out, and Polyphemus woke with a scream that shook the cave, that echoed across the island, that brought the other Cyclopes running to see what was wrong. He ripped the stake from his ruined eye and stumbled around the cave in agony, reaching blindly for the men, trying to grab them, to smash them. But they darted around his legs, using his own sheep as cover, staying just out of reach. Outside, the other Cyclopes called through the boulder, "Polyphemus, what's wrong? Who's attacking you? Who's hurting you?" And Polyphemus, not understanding the trick, shouted back, "Nobody! Nobody is attacking me! Nobody is trying to kill me!" The other Cyclopes, hearing this, assumed he'd gone mad or was suffering from some divine punishment. "If nobody's attacking you," they called back, "then it must be Zeus causing you pain. Pray to your father Poseidon. There's nothing we can do." And they left him there, alone with his pain and his rage and the men he couldn't catch. Escape morning came. Polyphemus, blind and furious, rolled away the boulder to let his flocks out to pasture. But he sat at the entrance, hands outstretched, feeling the back of each animal as it passed, making sure no men were riding them. He was clever, even in his pain. But Odysseus was cleverer. They'd spent the night tying themselves to the undersides of the rams, 3 sheep lashed together with willow branches, a man hanging beneath the middle one. When the sheep walked out, Polyphemus felt their woolly backs, never thinking to check underneath. One by one, Odysseus's men escaped, clinging to the bellies of the sheep, barely breathing, certain that at any moment those groping hands would find them. Odysseus himself chose the largest ram, the herd's leader, and clung to its thick fleece as it walked past the Cyclops. Polyphemus actually stopped that ram, running his hands over its back, speaking to it in a voice full of pain and something almost like affection. "Why are you last today?" his voice said. "You're always first, always leading. Are you grieving for your master's eye? If only you could speak, tell me where nobody is hiding, so I could smash his brains against these rocks." The ram, of course, said nothing, and eventually Polyphemus let it pass. Odysseus, hanging underneath, didn't breathe until they were far from the cave. Once clear, they ran for the ships, untied themselves from the sheep, drove some of the flock with them, and pushed off from shore as quickly as they could. They should have left silently. They should have just sailed away. But Odysseus, drunk on success and anger, couldn't resist. He stood up in his ship and shouted back at the island, taunting the blind Cyclops. "If anyone asks who blinded you," he yelled, "tell them it was Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca." It was a stupid, arrogant thing to do. Polyphemus, hearing the name, roared with recognition. Telemus, an ancient prophet, had once warned him that someone named Odysseus would blind him. He'd always pictured a giant, someone mighty and terrible, not this small, clever man. Polyphemus tore off the top of a mountain and hurled it at the sound of Odysseus's voice. The boulder splashed into the sea just in front of the ship, creating a wave that nearly drove them back to shore. Odysseus's men begged him to be silent, to just row, but he couldn't help himself. He shouted again, and Polyphemus, this time, prayed. "Father Poseidon," he called out, "if I am truly your son, hear me. Make Odysseus suffer. Let him never reach home. Or if he must reach it, let him arrive late, broken, alone, having lost all his men. Let him find trouble waiting for him." And Poseidon, god of the sea, heard his son's prayer, and the sea God was listening. Iolus and the Bag of Winds. They sailed on, shaken but alive, and eventually reached the floating island of Aeolia, home of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. Aeolus was not quite a god, but not quite mortal either, a figure blessed by Zeus to control all the winds that blew across the earth. He lived in luxury on his island with his 6 sons and 6 daughters, whom he'd married to each other in a setup that would be controversial in any other context but seemed to work fine for them. Aeolus welcomed Odysseus warmly, fascinated by his stories of Troy and eager for news from the wider world. For a month, Odysseus and his men stayed there, feasting and resting, regaining their strength. And when it came time to leave, Iolus gave Odysseus an extraordinary gift. He'd taken all the winds, all the breezes and gales that might blow Odysseus off course, and sealed them inside a leather bag, tied shut with silver cord. Only the west wind was left free to blow Odysseus directly home to Ithaca. It was a perfect gift, foolproof. All Odysseus had to do was not open the bag. They sailed for 9 days straight, the west wind steady and favorable, and on the 10th day, they could actually see Ithaca, the smoke from cooking fires, the coastline, home. Odysseus, who'd been manning the rudder himself for 9 days, refused to let anyone else steer, finally relaxed. He fell asleep, exhausted, but happy. They were almost there, and his men, watching him sleep, started talking. They'd noticed the bag. They'd seen Iolus give it to Odysseus, and they began to speculate. Odysseus already had treasure from Troy, they said. He probably had more treasure in that bag, gold and silver from Aeolus, while they got nothing, while they'd lost friends and suffered, and here was Odysseus hoarding his wealth. It wasn't fair. They should at least see what was in the bag, maybe divide it equally, the way proper comrades should. So they opened it, and all the winds that Iolus had carefully contained came roaring out in a single catastrophic blast. The ships were immediately caught in a chaos of competing gales, blown backwards, spun around, battered by winds coming from all directions at once. Odysseus woke to disaster. They were blown all the way back to Aeolia in a matter of hours, all that progress lost, ending up right where they'd started. Odysseus, desperate, went back to Iolus and begged for help again. But the Windkeeper, seeing what had happened, refused. "If the gods are against you this much," he said, "if you can't even make it home when I give you every advantage, then you're cursed. I won't go against divine will. Leave my island and don't come back." And Odysseus, humiliated and furious with his men, had no choice but to sail on, this time with no helpful winds, just oars and hope and the growing certainty that the gods really were determined to make him suffer. The Laestrygonians. The next land they reached was Telepylos, home of the Laestrygonians. It seemed promising at first. A narrow harbour surrounded by cliffs, calm water, a city visible in the distance. Odysseus, being cautious after previous disasters, anchored his own ship outside the harbour mouth, while the other 11 ships sailed inside. He sent scouts to explore, and they found a city of giants, not cyclopes. These giants had 2 eyes each and lived in organized cities with kings and laws. But they were cannibals, and they were aggressive. When the scouts encountered the king's daughter at a well, she led them to her father, King Antiphates, who immediately grabbed one scout and ate him. The other 2 ran, screaming, back to the harbour with the giants in pursuit. What happened next was a massacre. the Laestrygonians ran to the cliffs overlooking the harbor and began hurling boulders down at the ships. They smashed through hulls, crushed men, turned the water red with blood and splinters. Then the giants ran down to the shore and began spearing the survivors like fish, dragging them away to be eaten. Of the 11 ships in the harbor, not one escaped. Hundreds of men died in minutes, either crushed by rocks, or drowned, or caught and devoured. Only Odysseus's ship survived, and only because he'd kept it outside the harbor. He saw what was happening, drew his sword, and cut the anchor line in one stroke, screaming at his men to row. They rowed like their lives depended on it, because they did, pulling out to sea, while behind them their friends died screaming. Odysseus didn't look back. He couldn't. They rowed until they couldn't hear the screaming anymore, until the island was gone, until there was just open sea, and the terrible silence of 12 ships reduced to one. Circe's island, they were broken by this point. More than half their fleet gone, hundreds of men dead, and those who survived were hollow-eyed and barely functional. When they reached the next island, they didn't want to leave the ship. They just sat on the beach, staring at nothing, too traumatized to move. For 2 days they stayed like that, and Odysseus knew they couldn't continue this way. They needed food. They needed to know if this island was inhabited. They needed to function. He climbed a hill to scout and saw smoke rising from inland, a sign of habitation. He killed a stag on the way back, a huge animal, and brought it to his men as food. They ate mechanically, and Odysseus divided them into 2 groups. He'd lead one, his officer Eurylochus would lead the other. They'd draw lots to see which group would scout inland. Eurylochus's group was chosen. 23 men walked inland following the smoke. They came to a clearing in a dense forest where stood a beautiful house of polished stone. Around it prowled wolves and lions. But they didn't attack. They just watched with strange, almost human eyes. The men, nervous but curious, approached the house. From inside came singing, a woman's voice, clear and beautiful, and the sound of a loom where thread was being woven. They called out, and the singer emerged. Circe, daughter of Helios the sun god, and the nymph Perse, a goddess, though a lesser one, and a sorceress of considerable power. She was beautiful, gracious, welcoming. She invited the men inside, all except Eurylochus, who suspected a trap and stayed hidden outside. The others entered eagerly, relieved to find hospitality after so much horror. Circe seated them, gave them a mixture of cheese and barley meal and honey, stirred it all into Pramnian wine. They drank gratefully, and then she struck them with her wand, speaking a spell, and they began to change. Their bodies twisted, shrank, reformed. Hair became bristles, hands became hooves, faces elongated into snouts. But their minds stayed human. They were pigs, but they knew they were pigs, knew what had been done to them, and they wept as Circe drove them into her pigsty and threw them acorns to eat. Eurylochus saw enough through the windows to understand what had happened. He ran back to the ship in terror and reported to Odysseus, barely coherent, babbling about pigs and magic and how they had to leave, now, immediately. But Odysseus couldn't leave his men behind. Not again. He grabbed his sword and set off alone towards Circe's house, determined to save them, or die trying. He was intercepted by a young man on the path, beautiful and androgynous, carrying a golden staff. It was Hermes, the messenger god, who took pity on Odysseus, or perhaps just enjoyed chaos. He warned Odysseus that Circe would try the same trick on him, would mix her potion and transform him. But Hermes had a countermeasure, a plant called moly, with black root and milk-white flower. If Odysseus ate this before drinking Circe's wine, he'd be immune to her magic. And then, when she tried to transform him and failed, he should draw his sword and threaten her. She'd be so shocked that she'd offer him anything, but he should make her swear by the gods not to harm him before he agreed to anything. Odysseus took the moly, thanked Hermes, and continued to Circe's house. Everything happened as Hermes predicted. Circe invited him in, mixed the potion, gave him the drugged wine. He drank it. She struck him with her wand and commanded him to go to the Aestai with the others. But nothing happened. Odysseus stood there, unchanged, immune. He drew his sword and rushed at her as if to kill her. Circe shrieked and fell at his knees. "Who are you?" she cried. "No mortal man has ever resisted my magic. Unless you're Odysseus, the one Hermes told me would come here after fleeing Troy." And when he confirmed it, she changed tactics entirely. She offered him everything: a bath, food, a bed, the restoration of his men. "Just don't kill her, please." But Odysseus, remembering Hermes' advice, demanded she swear an oath by the river Styx, the most binding oath a god can make. "Swear you won't harm me or diminish me in any way." And Circe, impressed and perhaps a little attracted to his caution, swore. Then she kept her promises. His men were restored, turned from pigs back to humans, looking even younger and healthier than before. The ship's company was reunited, and Circe became, unexpectedly, an ally. More than an ally, really. Odysseus stayed with Circe for a year. The exhausted, traumatized survivors needed rest, needed time to heal, needed to remember what it felt like to sleep without fear. Circe's island was a paradise after the horrors they'd endured. Good food, soft beds, safety. And Circe and Odysseus became lovers. A relationship born partly from mutual respect and partly from the strange intimacy that comes from seeing each other at your most dangerous. After a year, his men finally approached him. "We need to go home," they said gently. "We're grateful for the rest. But if we stay much longer, we'll forget what home looks like. We'll become lotus eaters in a different way." Odysseus agreed. He asked Circe for guidance on how to get home, and her answer shocked him. "Before you can reach Ithaca," she said, "you must go somewhere else first. You must sail to the edge of the world, to the entrance of the underworld itself, and consult the dead prophet Tiresias. Only he can tell you how to complete your journey." Odysseus wept when he heard this. The underworld, the land of the dead. No living man had ever gone there and returned. But Circe was insistent. She gave him detailed instructions. Sail to the land of the Cimmerians, where fog and darkness cover everything. There, at the entrance to Hades, dig a trench, make sacrifices, call the dead, and speak with Tiresias. "The dead will come," she warned, "all of them. But you must not let them drink the blood of your sacrifice until Tiresias has drunk and spoken." And she gave him the rituals, the words to say, the offerings to make. The next morning, as they prepared to leave, one of his men, a young sailor named Elpenor, woke confused on the roof where he'd slept to escape the heat. Hearing the commotion of departure, he stood up too quickly, lost his balance, and fell. His neck broke in the fall. He died instantly. But in the rush to leave, no one noticed. They found his body later and felt terrible, But by then, they were already sailing toward the land of the dead, where Circe promised they would see Elpenor again. The voyage to the underworld takes them beyond all maps, beyond all known seas, to a place where the sun never shines, the land of the Cimmerians, perpetually shrouded in mist and darkness, where day and night blur into a single grey twilight. This is the edge of the world, where ocean and underworld meet, where the living are not meant to walk. But Circe's instructions are clear, and Odysseus follows them exactly. They beach their ship and walk inland until they reach the place she described. 2 rivers meet here, the Acheron and the Caucasus, rivers whose names mean woe and lamentation. Odysseus digs a trench, a cubit wide in each direction, and around it he pours libations. First honey mixed with milk, then sweet wine, then water. He sprinkles white barley over everything. Then he prays to the useless dead, promising that when he reaches home, he will sacrifice a barren heifer in their honor, will burn rich treasures on their altar. To Tiresias specifically, he promises a black ram, the finest from his flock. Then he cuts the throats of the animals he brought, the ram and a ewe, letting their dark blood flow into the trench. And the ghosts come. From the depths of Erebus, from the halls of Hades, they come. The dead, pale shades, barely visible in the gloom, drawn by the smell of blood, the only thing that can give them voice and consciousness, even briefly. Young men and girls, old men who suffered long, warriors still bearing their bloody wounds, brides who died before their weddings. They come in a rush, a clamoring crowd of the once living, and Odysseus has to draw his sword and hold them back, keep them from the blood, until Tiresias arrives. The first ghost to reach him is Elpenor, the young sailor who fell from Circe's roof. His shade is plaintive, confused. He begs Odysseus not to sail away and leave him unburied. A body left without funeral rites, he explains, is a soul denied rest, forced to wander the shores of the Styx forever, never crossing into proper death. It's a piteous request, and Odysseus promises they'll return to Circe's island, will give him a proper funeral with all the ceremony he deserves. Next comes a shade that stops Odysseus's heart. His mother, Anticlea. She died while he was gone, died of grief and longing for him, though he didn't know, couldn't have known. She reaches for the blood, her eyes desperate for a moment of consciousness. But Odysseus, weeping, holds her back. Tiresias first. That's what Circe said, Tiresias first. And then the prophet arrives. Tiresias, the blind seer of Thebes, who retained his powers of prophecy even in death. His shade is different from the others, more solid, more aware. Persephone, queen of the underworld, granted him unique privileges. He can speak and remember without drinking blood, though he drinks anyway, and his voice, when he speaks, carries the weight of absolute knowledge. He tells Odysseus hard truths. Poseidon's anger is real and will not fade quickly. The god of the sea will harry every voyage, will send storms and monsters and disasters until his rage is finally satisfied. But there is a path home. If Odysseus can be disciplined, if his men can be controlled, they will come to Thrinacia, the island of the sun god Helios, where sacred cattle graze, untouchable and holy. If they leave those cattle alone, if they can resist the temptation of easy food, no matter how hungry they become, they can reach Ithaca, all of them, safe. But if they harm those cattle, Tiresias warns, disaster will follow. The ship will be destroyed, the crew will die, and Odysseus, if he survives, will arrive home alone, late, broken, in a ship that belongs to someone else, to find his house full of arrogant men trying to steal his wife and his kingdom. Even then, the journey won't be over. After he's dealt with those suitors, after he's reclaimed his home, he must make one more journey. He must take an oar and walk inland, away from the sea, walk until he reaches people who have never seen the ocean, who don't even recognize an oar, who think it's a winnowing fan for grain. There, in that landlocked place, he must plant the oar in the ground and make sacrifice to Poseidon. Only then will the sea god's anger truly end. And death, when it finally comes for Odysseus, will be gentle. It will come from the sea, but not violently. It will come in his old age, with his people prosperous around him. It's a prophecy of both hope and warning, and Odysseus listens carefully, committing every word to memory. Tiresias drinks one more time, then fades back into the shadows, and now Odysseus can finally let his mother approach. She drinks the blood, and consciousness returns. She sees him, recognizes him, and begins to cry. "How did you come here?" she asks. "You're alive. The living don't visit the dead. What happened?" And Odysseus tells her everything, or as much as he can bear to, about Troy, about the journey, about being so close to home and having everything go wrong. She tells him about Ithaca, how Penelope remains faithful, but surrounded by suitors, how Telemachus is trying to be a man, trying to hold the kingdom together, but he's young and alone, how his father Laertes has retreated to his farm, an old man now, wearing rags and sleeping in the dirt with his servants, broken by grief, and how she herself died, not of illness, but of longing. She missed him so much that her heart simply broke. She faded away, calling his name, hoping he would come home just once more before she died. Odysseus tries to embrace her, tries to hold his mother one last time, but she's a shade, less substantial than smoke. 3 times he reaches for her. 3 times his arms close on nothing. And his mother explains, gently, that this is what death is. The spirit separates from the body, flies away like a dream. She cannot be held, but she is not in pain. She just is. And she tells him to go, to leave this place of death, to go back to the living and tell his wife everything he's seen. She fades, a whisper of smoke in the darkness. Other shades come forward. Agamemnon, the great king who led the Greeks at Troy, murdered in his own bath by his wife and her lover on the very day he returned home. His shade is bitter, warns Odysseus not to trust anyone, not even his own wife, though he admits Penelope is different, loyal in ways Clytemnestra never was. But still, be careful. Trust no one. Achilles arrives, the greatest warrior who ever lived, and Odysseus tries to comfort him by praising his fame, his glory, his honor among the dead. But Achilles, unexpectedly, is dismissive. "I'd rather be a slave to the poorest man on earth," he says, "than be king of all these dead. Life, even a miserable life, is better than this grey half-existence in Hades." But he brightens when Odysseus tells him about his son Neoptolemus, who fought bravely at Troy, who survived the war. Knowing his son lives and thrives is the only comfort Achilles has found in death. Ajax is there too, but he won't speak, still angry about the armor of Achilles, which was awarded to Odysseus rather than him. Ajax committed suicide out of shame and fury. Even in death, he holds his grudge, turning away when Odysseus tries to apologize, walking back into the darkness without a word. And finally, Odysseus sees the great sinners of mythology: Tantalus, forever reaching for fruit and water that move away whenever he grasps them. Sisyphus pushing his boulder up a hill only to watch it roll back down over and over, forever. These are the special prisoners of Hades, punished eternally for crimes against the gods. It's too much. The dead are pressing in, more and more of them, and Odysseus suddenly feels panic. A mortal man too deep in the realm of death. What if he can't leave? What if the underworld keeps him? He runs back to the ship, orders his men to push off immediately. They row hard, desperate to leave this place, and somehow, impossibly, they sail back into the world of the living, back where the sun still shines and the air doesn't taste of graves. Circe's warnings, they return to Aiaia, Circe's island, long enough to give Elpenor his funeral. They burn his body with his armor and ore, build him a proper burial mound, mark it with his name. It's a small gesture after so much death, but it matters. Elpenor's shade can rest now. Circe, when she learns they've successfully returned from the underworld, is impressed and frightened in equal measure. She prepares them a feast, but more importantly, she gives them information. What lies ahead, what dangers, what choices. She knows Odysseus won't stay, knows he's determined to reach Ithaca, no matter the cost. So she arms him with knowledge. First, the sirens. Two creatures, neither quite woman nor bird, who sit on an island surrounded by the bones of sailors. They sing, and their song is irresistible. Not because it's beautiful, though it is, but because it promises knowledge. They know everything that happened at Troy. Everything that's happening in the world. They sing of secrets, of hidden wisdom, of answers to questions you didn't know you had. And sailors, hearing those songs, turn their ships toward the island, unable to resist, and wreck themselves on the rocks. They sit there, entranced, listening, until they starve to death, adding their bones to the pile. Circe's advice is simple. Plug your men's ears with beeswax so they can't hear. Row past with speed. If Odysseus himself wants to hear the song, and she knows he's too curious not to, he should have his men tie him to the mast and order them not to release him, no matter what he says. Once the sirens are behind them, it will be safe. Next comes a choice. Two possible routes through a narrow strait. One way leads past Scylla, a six-headed monster who lives in a cave high on the cliff face. Each head is on a long neck, snaking down to snatch sailors from passing ships. She'll take 6 men, Circe warns. No more, no less. It's inevitable. There's no way to fight her, no way to avoid her. She's too high, too fast. The best they can do is row quickly and accept the loss. The other way leads past Charybdis, a massive whirlpool that sucks down ships 3 times a day, pulling them to the bottom of the sea where they're crushed and drowned. Nothing survives Charybdis. Nothing. If Odysseus tries to sail past her, they'll all die. So, Circe advises, horrible as it sounds, take the Scylla route, lose 6 men rather than everyone. And finally, Thrinacia. She echoes Tiresias' warning. The cattle of Helios graze there, sacred and untouchable. Sail past. Don't stop. Don't even consider it. But if they must stop, if storms force them to, then under no circumstances should they harm those cattle. The sun god will demand vengeance, and Zeus will grant it. Odysseus listens, commits it all to memory, and at dawn they sail. One last night with Circe, one more warning, one more kiss, and then open sea again, heading home, always heading home. They find sirens. They hear the sirens before they see them. The wind dies suddenly, the sea goes glassy calm, as if the world itself is holding its breath. And then the singing begins, floating across the water, impossibly clear, impossibly beautiful. Odysseus has already prepared. His men's ears are plugged tight with beeswax, kneaded soft, and then pressed in until they can't hear anything but their own heartbeat. They're rowing mechanically, watching Odysseus for signals. And Odysseus himself is lashed to the mast, rope wound around his chest and arms, tied so tight he can barely breathe. The song is everything Circe promised, and worse. It starts with his name. Odysseus, they sing. Noble Odysseus, come to us. Listen, we know what you've suffered. We know what happened at Troy. Every battle, every strategy, every moment of glory. We know what awaits you in Ithaca. We can tell you everything. Just come closer. Just listen. And Odysseus wants to. Desperately, he fights against the ropes, screaming at his men to untie him, to turn the ship, to let him reach those voices. But his men can't hear him, can't hear the sirens, can only see their captain thrashing and shouting and clearly out of his mind. They row faster, and two of them, following his earlier orders, come and tie more ropes, binding him tighter until he can't move at all. The sirens try different tactics. They sing of Penelope, of his son, of his father. They promise reunions, promise peace, promise answers to every question that's haunted him for 20 years. But the ship keeps moving. The island gets no closer, and finally, mercifully, they're out of range. The singing fades. The wind picks up again, and Odysseus, sagging against the mast, nods to his men that it's safe. They untie him, remove the wax from their ears, and sail on, shaken but alive. Later, Odysseus will wonder what the sirens really knew, if the knowledge they promised was real or just another beautiful lie. But he'll never know, and maybe that's better. Some questions don't have answers worth dying for. Scylla and Charybdis. The strait is exactly as terrifying as Circe described. On one side, the whirlpool Charybdis spins endlessly, a massive mouth in the sea that sucks down water and anything floating on it. The roar of it echoes off the cliffs, a constant grinding howl. On the other side, the cave where Scylla lives, too high to see clearly, just a dark opening in the cliff face. Odysseus makes his choice. They hug the Scylla side, rowing quickly, staying as far from the cave as they can, while still avoiding Charybdis's pull. He doesn't tell his men about Scylla. What would be the point? Knowing they're about to watch 6 of their friends die wouldn't help. It would just paralyze them with fear, so they row, and Odysseus stands at the prow with his sword and shield, knowing they're useless but unable to just stand there unarmed. Scylla strikes without warning. 6 heads on 6 long necks snake down from the cave, impossibly fast, impossibly long. Each head grabs a man, plucking them from the deck like a bird catching fish. The men scream, reaching out, calling Odysseus' name, and he can do nothing. Nothing. He watches them being lifted, struggling, knowing they're already dead. Scylla pulls them back into her cave, and their screams echo for a moment before cutting off with horrible finality. The surviving men row faster, terror giving them strength, and they escape the strait. But the look in their eyes has changed. They've lost too many friends. They're starting to wonder if any of them will actually make it home, or if the journey itself is the punishment, and they're all just meat for whatever monster they meet next. The cattle of the sun. Thrinacia appears ahead, an island green and pleasant looking. Odysseus wants to sail past. He tells his men about Tiresias's warning, about Circe's advice. They cannot stop here. But his men are exhausted, traumatized, barely functional. They beg for a rest. Just one night ashore. Please. They won't touch the cattle, they promise. They have food from Circe's island. They just need to sleep on land instead of rowing through another night. Odysseus, against his better judgment, agrees, but he makes them swear an oath. Don't touch the cattle. Don't even look at them wrong. They're sacred to Helios, and harming them would bring disaster. His men swear. They mean it. They beach the ship, make camp, eat their rations, and sleep under the stars. In the morning, they plan to leave. But the winds don't cooperate. Storm winds blow from the south, making it impossible to sail. They're trapped on Thrinacia. Days pass, a week, 2 weeks, a month. Their rations run out. They fish, hunt birds, forage for anything edible. But it's never enough. They're slowly starving, and all around them, fat cattle graze, sleek and healthy, completely unaware of the desperate, hungry men watching them. Odysseus prays for guidance, walks inland to make sacrifice, and falls asleep from exhaustion. And in his absence, his officer Eurylochus speaks to the men. "We're going to die anyway," he says. "If we don't eat, we'll starve. If we sail, Poseidon will probably sink us. We're dead no matter what. Wouldn't it be better to die with full bellies? And if the gods are angry, well, they're already angry. What's one more offense? At least we'll die quickly at sea rather than slowly wasting away here." It's a persuasive argument from a desperate man. And the starving crew, too weak to think clearly, agree. They choose the best cattle, make proper sacrifice with prayers and apologies, roast the meat, and eat. For the first time in weeks, they're full. It's worth it, they tell themselves. Even if Helios punishes them, at least they won't die hungry. Helios, of course, knows immediately. His cattle are not just animals. They're extensions of himself, sacred and watched. When they're slaughtered, he feels it. He goes straight to Zeus and demands justice. "Either punish these men," he says, "or I'll take my son down to the underworld and shine for the dead instead. The living don't deserve my light if they won't respect my property." Zeus, tired of dealing with angry gods and wanting to keep the sun where it belongs, agrees. He'll punish Odysseus's men. Once they're at sea again, he'll destroy their ship. As soon as the winds shift and let them leave the island, they're dead. The final storm. The winds change after 6 days. Odysseus's men, their bellies full and their spirits temporarily lifted, don't notice the bad omens. They should have. The cattle skins crawl on the ground as if alive. The roasting meat bellows like living cattle. But they ignore it or rationalize it. Or maybe they're just too far gone to care. They board the ship, raise the sail, and leave Thrinacia behind. For one day, the sailing is perfect. The wind is favorable, the sea calm. Odysseus almost lets himself hope. Maybe Helios will be merciful. Maybe Zeus will forget. Maybe. And then the storm hits. Black clouds rolling in from nowhere, wind from all directions, waves like moving mountains. The mast snaps, lightning flashes, and Zeus's thunderbolt, bright as a sun, strikes the ship dead center. The boat explodes in a shower of burning wood. Men are flung into the sea, floating like crows on the waves, Odysseus would later say, before they vanish beneath the surface. Every single one of them drowns. Odysseus, clinging to debris, watches them die. His entire crew, all the men who survived Troy, who trusted him, who followed him through hell, gone. He lashes together the broken keel and mast with leather rigging, makes a crude raft, and floats. The storm blows him back through the strait, past Scylla again, who doesn't bother with a lone man on wreckage, past Charybdis, who sucks down his raft and spits him back up, somehow, miraculously, alive. He clings to a branch overhanging the whirlpool, hanging there for hours, until the current shifts, then drops back onto his raft and floats. For 9 days, he drifts, alone, barely conscious, sunburned and salt-crusted and delirious. The gods finally show mercy, or maybe they've just run out of punishments, because on the 10th day, the current carries him to Ogygia, to Calypso's island, where he's pulled from the waves, cared for and held for 7 years, where we first met him sitting on the beach, crying, where our story truly began. The journey home at last. And now, sitting in the palace of the Phaeacians, having told them everything, Odysseus falls silent. The court is silent too. No one moves. They've listened all night, entranced by his tale of suffering and survival. King Alcinous finally speaks. You've endured more than any man should have to, and we will help you. Tomorrow, we'll give you one of our ships, the fastest we have, and our sailors will take you home to Ithaca, no matter what Poseidon thinks about it. The next day, they load Odysseus onto a Phaeacian ship with gifts, treasure, bronze tripods, gold, fine cloth. The Phaeacians are generous beyond measure, and their ships are magical, faster than thought, guided by the will of their crew rather than wind and current. They set sail in the evening, and Odysseus, exhausted from his storytelling, falls into the deepest sleep of his life. He sleeps through the entire voyage. The Phaeacians reach Ithaca before dawn, and rather than wake him, they gently carry him ashore, still sleeping, and lay him in a quiet cove with all his treasure beside him. Then they sail away, their mission complete. But Poseidon, watching, is furious. These Phaeacians have defied him, helped his enemy, and done it with ease. As their ship approaches home, Poseidon turns it to stone, rooting it to the seafloor in sight of their harbour. A warning, a punishment. The Phaeacians will never again escort travellers home. Odysseus wakes on a beach, disoriented, with no idea where he is. The fog is thick and the landscape unfamiliar. He's been gone 20 years. He doesn't recognize his own island. Athena appears, disguised as a young shepherd, and he asks where he is. She tells him, and he can barely believe it. Ithaca, after everything, home. But Athena warns him. The palace is full of suitors, over 100 men who've been courting Penelope, eating his food, drinking his wine, trying to force her to remarry. Telemachus, his son, is in danger. If Odysseus just walks into the palace announcing himself, he'll be killed. He needs to be smart. He needs a plan. So Athena disguises him as an old beggar, grey-haired and bent, dressed in a filthy rags. His own mother wouldn't recognize him in this form, and she sends him to find Eumaeus, his loyal swineherd, who lives on the outskirts of the estate. Start there. Test the loyalty of your servants, then move against the suitors. The swineherd Eumaeus doesn't recognize the beggar who approaches his hut, but he welcomes him anyway. He's a good man, loyal to Odysseus even after 20 years, and he practices the ancient laws of hospitality, even though he has little to share. He gives the stranger food, a place to sleep by the fire, and they talk through the evening. The swineherd speaks about his master Odysseus, how he misses him, how he believes he's dead, even though he wishes otherwise, how the suitors are destroying the estate. how young Telemachus is trying his best but can't stand against so many. Odysseus, still in disguise, tells fabricated stories about his travels, claims he met Odysseus recently, that the king is alive and coming home soon. Eumaeus is skeptical, but wants desperately to believe it. And while they talk, Telemachus returns from his own journey. He'd been to Sparta and Pylos, searching for news of his father, following Athena's advice. The goddess warned him of the suitor's ambush on his way home, helped him avoid it, and now directs him to the swineherd's hut. When Telemachus arrives, Odysseus sees his son for the first time since Telemachus was an infant, a grown man now, tall and serious, carrying the weight of a kingdom on shoulders too young for it. Eumaeus goes to prepare food, and Athena gives Odysseus a sign. It's time. She removes his disguise in a shimmer of divine magic, restoring his true appearance. Father and son stand face to face. Telemachus is terrified at first, thinks the beggar is a god. But Odysseus assures him, "I'm your father. I'm real. I'm home." And Telemachus breaks down, the grief and loneliness of 20 years pouring out as they embrace. They hold each other and weep, and for a moment, there's no plan, no revenge, just a father and son reunited after a lifetime apart. But the moment passes. They have work to do. Odysseus explains the situation. They'll enter the palace tomorrow. He'll maintain his beggar disguise. Telemachus should hide all the weapons in the hall, claim he's cleaning them. When the time comes, when they're ready, Athena will give them a sign and they'll strike. But Telemachus must not tell anyone, not even Penelope, that Odysseus has returned. Not yet. They can't trust anyone. The palace Odysseus enters his own palace as a stranger, an old beggar seeking charity. The great hall is filled with suitors, young nobles from Ithaca and the surrounding islands, lounging on cushions, eating meat and drinking wine like they own the place. They barely glance at him. Just another beggar. The palace has seen many in recent years, but Odysseus's old hunting dog, Argos, recognizes him. The dog is lying on a dung heap, old and flea-bitten, ignored by everyone. He was a puppy when Odysseus left. Now he's ancient, just barely alive. But when Odysseus approaches, the dog's tail wags weakly. His ears perk up. He knows. Odysseus wants to pet him, to acknowledge him, but he can't break his disguise. So he walks past, and Argos, having seen his master one last time, lies down and dies. It's a small moment, but it breaks Odysseus's heart. The suitors treat the beggar with contempt. They mock him, throw scraps at him, insult him. One of them, Antinous, the worst of the lot, even throws a footstool at Odysseus's shoulder. But Odysseus endures it. He's taking their measure, watching, learning who is merely arrogant and who is genuinely dangerous. He's gathering information for the slaughter to come. Penelope hears about the beggar and, curious, asks to speak with him. There's a long interview where she asks about his travels and he tells more false stories, but within them he weaves claims of having met Odysseus, of knowing he's alive. Penelope is skeptical, heartbroken, desperate to believe, but afraid of hope. She's been waiting 20 years. She's been fooled by false news before. Then the old nurse, Eurycleia, is ordered to wash the beggar's feet. As she does, she notices a scar on his leg, a scar from a hunting accident in his youth. She knows that scar. She gasps, about to cry out, but Odysseus grabs her throat, hisses at her to be silent. Later, he says, tell no one. She nods, tears streaming down her face, and obeys. The contest of the bow, Penelope, worn down and despairing, makes an announcement. She'll finally choose a husband, but not randomly. She proposes a contest. In the storeroom is Odysseus's great bow, a massive weapon that only he could string. Whichever suitor can string that bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads lined up in a row will win her hand. It seems fair. It seems impossible. The suitors accept eagerly. Finally, a resolution. The next day, the axes are set up, and one by one, the suitors try the bow. They can't even bend it. It's too massive, the string too tight, the pull too heavy. They heat it by the fire, rub it with fat, try every trick they know. Nothing works. They grow frustrated, then angry, then humiliated. The beggar speaks up. "Let me try." The suitors laugh, mock him. Antinous says absolutely not. If a beggar strings the bow, it'll shame us all. But Telemachus asserts himself. He's the master of this house until a new one is chosen, and he says the beggar can try. Penelope supports this, then is sent to her chambers by her son. It's for her protection, though she doesn't know it yet. Odysseus takes the bow. He examines it like a musician examines a lyre, checking the wood, the string, the curve. The suitors watch, some nervous, some amused. He strings it easily, casually, like it's nothing. Then he plucks the string, and it sings, a clear musical note that rings through the hall. He notches an arrow, draws, and fires. The arrow passes through all 12 axes. A perfect shot. The hall goes silent, and Odysseus drops his disguise. Athena's magic falls away, revealing him as he truly is. Not an old beggar, but a king, a warrior, a man who has killed before and is about to kill again. He reaches for another arrow and takes his next target, Antinous, lifting a cup of wine to his lips. The arrow takes him through the throat. He drops, blood spurting, wine mixing with it on the floor. The slaughter. The suitors panic. Some think it was an accident. Some realize the truth immediately. Odysseus announces himself, "I am Odysseus, and you've been eating my food, courting my wife, and abusing my son for years. Now you'll pay." Telemachus appears beside him, armed. The doors are barred. The weapons are removed. The suitors are trapped. Some beg for mercy. Some rush for exits that won't open. Some try to fight with chairs and tables as weapons. But Odysseus and Telemachus, aided by the loyal servants Immerse and Philoetius, cut them down methodically. It's not glorious, it's brutal. Arrow after arrow, spear after spear. Blood spreads across the floor. Men die screaming. Some try to surrender. Odysseus kills most of them anyway. They disrespected his home. They threatened his family. Death is the only fitting response. Athena appears briefly, turning aside weapons, spreading panic among the suitors. The goddess of wisdom has become the goddess of slaughter, and she's efficient. By the end, over 100 men lie dead. The hall is soaked with blood. The servants who betrayed Odysseus, who slept with the suitors and helped them, are executed too. It's merciless. It's justice, by ancient standards. The reunion Penelope, hearing the noise, finally comes down. Euryclea tells her the beggar was Odysseus, that her husband has returned, that the suitors are dead. But Penelope can't believe it, won't believe it. She's been disappointed too many times, so she tests him. She tells Euryclea to move their bed out of the bedroom so Odysseus can sleep there. Odysseus is shocked. The bed can't be moved. He built it himself, built their entire bedroom around an olive tree. One of its posts is the living tree trunk rooted into the earth. No one knows that except him and Penelope. If the bed's been moved, someone cut through that tree, destroyed something sacred. And only Odysseus and Penelope knew that detail. She smiles, her first real smile in 20 years. Only her husband would know about the bed. This truly is Odysseus. And finally, they embrace. She weeps. He weeps. 20 years of separation, of suffering, of longing, and they're together again. Not young anymore. Both changed by time, but together. Athena holds back the dawn, giving them the night, and they talk. They make love. They tell each other everything that's happened. She tells him about the suitors, about her tricks to delay them, about the shroud she wove by day and unraveled by night. He tells her about his journey, all of it, holding nothing back. And they plan their future, because even now, even reunited, there are problems. The suitors' families will want revenge. There will be blood feuds. This isn't over, but that's tomorrow's concern. Tonight, they have each other. Odysseus is home, against all odds, against gods and monsters and fate itself. He made it back. The journey is over. The Odyssey is done. The end. The next day, Odysseus visits his father Laertes, who's been living like a peasant on his farm, broken by grief. He reveals himself, and the old man weeps with joy. Then the suitors' families arrive, armed and angry, ready for revenge. Another battle seems inevitable. But Athena intervenes one last time. Enough blood, enough suffering. Zeus agrees. They impose peace, magically, divinely. The families swear oaths. The feuds are ended. Odysseus will rule Ithaca again, and life will go on. And that's where Homer leaves us. Not with glory or triumph, but with peace. Hard-won, imperfect peace. Odysseus has lost almost everything. His crew, his ships, 20 years of his life. But he has Penelope, he has Telemachus, he has Ithaca, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough. So that's the Odyssey, a 10-year journey home that cost everything, a story of perseverance and cunning, of loyalty and loss, of a man who refused to give up even when the gods themselves were against him. Homer gave us more than an adventure tale. He gave us something deeper, something that still resonates 3,000 years later. Because Odysseus' journey isn't really about geography, it's about identity, about what it means to be human in a world controlled by forces beyond our understanding, about whether cleverness can overcome fate, about whether home is a place or the people waiting for you there. Every monster Odysseus faced was also a temptation. The Lotus Eaters offered forgetting, Circe offered pleasure, Calypso offered immortality, the Sirens offered knowledge. And at every turn, Odysseus said no, not because those things weren't appealing, but because they weren't home. They weren't Penelope. They weren't the rocky shores of Ithaca where his family waited. Think about what that means. A man choosing mortality over eternal life, choosing struggle over ease, choosing a mortal wife who's aged 20 years over a goddess will never change. It's irrational. It's beautiful. It's profoundly human. Odysseus understands something the gods never quite grasp. That meaning comes from limitation, from death, from the knowledge that our time is finite and therefore precious. And Penelope, often overlooked in retellings, is just as remarkable. She waited 20 years, fought off over 100 suitors, raised a son alone, held a kingdom together through sheer force of will and cleverness. She's Odysseus' equal, not his prize. When they reunite, it's not because he rescued her. She rescued herself. What they share is recognition. Two people who refuse to give up on each other despite everything. The Odyssey reminds us that the journey matters as much as the destination, that who we become along the way, what we endure, what we learn, shapes us more than any final arrival. Odysseus returns home different from the man who left, harder, wiser, scarred. He's lost his innocence, his men, his illusions about divine justice. But he's gained something too, a profound understanding of what matters, of what's worth fighting for. This story has survived for millennia because we still recognize ourselves in it. We're all trying to get home in one way or another. We all face storms and monsters and temptations. We all have sirens singing to us, promising easy answers, quick fixes, shortcuts that will only lead us onto the rocks. And we all have to decide again and again whether to keep rowing, keep struggling, keep believing that home is still out there somewhere, even when we can't see it. Homer knew something essential about storytelling, that the best tales aren't about people who have it easy. They're about people who suffer, who fail, who keep going anyway. Odysseus doesn't win every battle. He makes mistakes. His pride costs him dearly. His curiosity gets his men killed. But he learns, he adapts, and he never, ever stops trying to get home. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, carried on the wine, dark sea of your own dreams, remember this: the journey's never easy. The gods, or fate, or chance, whatever you want to call it, will throw everything they can at you. You'll lose things along the way: friends, time, innocence. But if you keep your eyes on home, whatever home means to you, if you stay clever and stubborn and refuse to give up, you just might make it. Odysseus did. Against impossible odds, against literal gods, he made it. And his story lives on, told and retold, a reminder that the human spirit, armed with wit and will, can survive anything, even a 10-year war, followed by a 10-year nightmare voyage through monsters and magic and divine wrath. The journey may be long, but it ends. Eventually, you find your shore, you walk up that beach, you enter that hall, you embrace the people who waited, and the Odyssey becomes a story you tell by the fire, impossible and real, yours to remember and impossible to forget. Thank you for sailing with me tonight through this ancient tale. If it helped you rest, if it gave you something to dream about, I'd be grateful if you liked the video and subscribed to the channel. And let me know in the comments what your favorite part of the Odyssey is, or which other myths you'd like to hear. There are so many more stories to tell, so many more journeys to take. Until next time, sleep well, dream of open seas and distant shores, and remember that no matter how far you've drifted, home is always worth reaching for. Good night.